So we keep hearing gold standard. Either it is the gold standard, or voters have a good reason to distrust state government. And it isn't because some legislators, what you see there, if you can't see the image, this is a snippet, a screenshot from a Common Cause celebratory meme, yay, that Secretary of State Jenna Griswold posted celebrating that 5 different bills trying to pursue election integrity that were introduced in the Assembly were defeated on straight party line votes. And so Secretary of State Griswold was happy about that because every measure that you take to pursue election integrity and voter integrity is apparently voter suppression. And Colorado voters do not distrust state government because some legislators tried to improve election integrity. They distrust state government because the emperor has no clothes. We're being gaslit constantly with the gold standard canard. And we're going to talk about that. So when public officials talk to voters about our election system, they describe it almost in cartoon terms. These are from one particular county, so you probably can't see it. I know I make eye charts. I like to get into the details and then I forget what I'm doing. So the first section there is the score, which is Colorado's registration database. And then the next is this graphic that shows you the life of a ballot from the time it's created in the election event designer to the time that it's sent out to voters, and then when they send it back and who processes it and how it gets picked up, et cetera. And then the next is a column that explains the election management system, but in a really simplified, oversimplified cartoon version of it. And then the next column is election night reporting system. So we're going to talk about each one of these. So this is what our public officials explain our election system to voters with. But when you're systems thinkers, you immediately start digging deeper. And this is what happened. I had told the crowds before, I hadn't looked into elections at all before the 3rd of November. I didn't read anything about them. I mean, I had a general idea of how elections work, but I didn't know anything about the systems or the procedures inside any state or county, not even my own. When you're in active duty military, you move around everywhere, right? And so it doesn't really matter what anybody's local procedures are. You're voting by mail anyway. But when a systems thinker starts looking at the systems involved, it immediately gets more complex. And so we start looking up systems data, technical descriptions, evaluation reports, requirement statements, and then we start looking at the components involved. So immediately the chart gets very complex for us. So what you're looking at here are a more complex version that describes the physical layer for the SCORE system, the statewide Colorado online registration database or registration system. And then below that, the ballot tracks service that is tracking everybody's ballot. So we'll talk about them too. Then in the center, you have Dominion voting systems, and it's not a few, central scanners and then a server somewhere. It's a lot of systems. In fact, between the Dominion systems that we have in 62 counties and the clear ballot systems in 2 counties, you're talking about over 2,600 computer systems that are certified by the state and approved for use. That's just in the voting system. I'm not even talking about SCORE or ballot tracks or the systems used in the Colorado risk limiting audit or the systems used in text to cure. I'm just talking about the 2 voting systems are over 2,600. And then when I start looking at the cartoon diagrams, reasonable people start having reasonable questions about them, like how are these secured and what are they connected to and who has evaluated them? And if you could read any of those words that I have on my tiny, tiny little chart, you would see those reasonable questions. But we go through those. So I'm just looking through the graphics that the elected officials and public officials give us. And these are the questions come to mind. And then when you're people like Dennis or I, you go answer those questions for yourself. That's a lifetime of training and instinct to go answer those. And we're going to talk about the results from that. And here, this is the last one of those, I think. So here are the questions, and hopefully you can see those. So like asking about SCORE, SCORE is connected to and through public internet. Right? WebScore, the e-poll book that are used in the counties, that's just a web interface into SCORE. And we're going to talk about some of the vulnerabilities that are known, published vulnerabilities in the systems that we're using that we don't see any evidence that they've been addressed in any reporting or in any security measures that the state or the county are taking. And so I've got several questions there about score, so the chart says that the county maintains the voting systems. Well, they don't have access to update software. They're not allowed to do that. They don't get to go buy their own media to use to transfer the files. They get those from the voting system manufacturers. They're not allowed to audit the systems. They don't have the authority. That's what they've told us, that they don't have the authority to audit the systems that they are certifying the elections off of. So they're telling voters, this system's secure, it's the gold standard, we have RLAs, but they themselves don't have either the skill sets or I think the resources or the authority to look inside those systems, let alone actually look inside those systems like Zoolander and crack the cases open and see what's actually installed. And then when we're talking about the election data, people have probably heard of CIDL and Clarity Elections. Our election data, when you go to view as a citizen, the election night reporting, and it's still the same. You can look at past data on the Secretary of State site, but if you want to see election night reporting, it doesn't come from the Secretary of State. It goes directly from counties to Clarity Elections, a wholly owned subsidiary of CIDL, which is a Spanish flagged company. My understanding, they don't even have servers in the United States. And that's where you see our election results from. So some foreign company with foreign servers gets our data and then tells us what the result is. That makes me uncomfortable. Those two columns on the side, there's the MITRE Corporation, which is a government-funded federally funded research and development corporation. They do all sorts of cybersecurity analysis and support for the federal government. And they have a model that they call ATTACK, which sort of describes all the various attack tactics and techniques that adversaries can use against systems, whether they're enterprise, networked, or mobile. And the reason I put these columns in there is I want everybody to understand that this cartoon version that the public officials provide is not how adversaries view our systems. Even the system level questions that I'm describing is not how adversaries view our systems. They view them in a very methodical adversarial manner. They're looking for vulnerabilities. So when you hear, for example, our systems aren't connected to the internet because there's no cable jacked into the back, you have no way of knowing by looking to see if there's a cable jacked into the back. You would have to, not only would you have to crack open the case, but you can't even just rely on being able to identify something that looks like a radio frequency modem, like a cellular modem. There can be chips in there, and I'll show you some examples. There can be chips in there that look like something else because they're deliberately inserted in the supply chain in order to provide that backdoor into the system. So what you see there on the left-hand side is a list of adversary tactics, one of which is to establish initial access. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see the 9 techniques that adversaries can use to establish initial access. Then there are 10 sub-techniques below those 9 techniques, and then there are literally thousands of attack vectors that they will use employing or that model on those techniques. So one of them, for example, is hardware additions or corrupting supply chain. One of them is to go through external remote servers or services. We've seen, they say drive-by, so if they have an RF capability at all, and this is what Jovan Pulitzer was talking about, penetrating into the ICX, the Dominion ICX system that they were using down in Georgia in the runoff election, that was a drive-by attack. They scanned, found an open port on a system in use, and penetrated the voting system in use without ever even entering the center. So I put these up there just because this is how adversaries think. I'm going to just briefly describe the election system. So our statewide Colorado registration election system was commissioned in 2008. It has the registered voter database. It has a signature repository. It tracks ballots. It supports e-poll books so that county officials, when they're conducting elections, can look up voters and see who's authorized to vote. It was built by Sabre engineers, which then were bought by Hewlett-Packard. So they say Hewlett-Packard engineers, but it was really predated them. And the system was called Electus before it was called SCORE. So SCORE is actually a state-tailored implementation of the Electus system. And when you start digging into other states, you find the same exact software being used in multiple other states under different names. So while it looks like it's state-developed, it's really not state-developed. It's now state-maintained. So I've looked at all the initial production documents that were on the Secretary of State site. They say they did security testing. It was not security testing. It was functional testing. You can look up the credentials of the person who was the lead for the testing. They listed Microsoft Office and scanner and printer setup as security credentials. The Sabre security devices are also compromised, and I'll talk about those. I don't mean that the ones on our system have been compromised. I haven't confirmed that. The only way to confirm it is a forensic audit, which we haven't done, the state hasn't done, and we haven't been allowed to do. But the systems themselves have multiple published known vulnerabilities. They're extraordinarily vulnerable. And they also have no 24/7 monitoring or defense of the system. So even though it's connected to public-facing internet, it's not being defended. There is an office under the Chief Information Officer for the state that's responsible for security, and I called them on a Thursday night at about 8 p.m. and got their voicemail, and it hadn't been set up. That tells me pretty much all I need to know, because against the nation-state level threat, they don't ever sleep. There's no time when you can have a system that's attack surface is exposed and then let your defenses down. It'd be like walking away from the guard post at the perimeter of a facility. We shoot people for that, right? But for our electronic systems, for our voting system that affects everybody, there's just no defense of it. The registration system was also being fed and cleaned up, so to speak, by a program called the Kansas Crosscheck. It was a multi-state collaborative that they started in Kansas. It was free to Colorado, completely free, and it was focused on removing duplicate voters and dead voters. So that was their focus. But our Secretary of State withdrew Colorado from that Kansas Crosscheck program in January 2019. And later that year, the ACLU was suing Kansas over it because they said there were privacy issues with it. And so they halted the program completely. Instead, Colorado was a founding member of the Electronic Registration Information Center, which is a nonprofit corporation formed in 2012 with seed funds from Pew Charitable Trusts. And they charge Colorado an initial fee, just like other states, of $25,000 and then annual dues. So we went from a free system that was focused on cleaning up rolls to a system we have to pay for, and it's no longer focused on cleaning up rolls. The membership requires that Colorado and other member states send all our DMV data. So anybody goes into a DMV and signs up for anything, whether they're a citizen or not, their names go forward to Eric. And then Eric turns around and sends names back to Colorado for inclusion in our registration database. So when in the first year of the program, and you can look up the MIT report, I think I've got the link in this post online, Colorado sent out postcards to these Eric identified individuals. I want to say it was about 79,000. And they got 10% of those postcards returned. And of those 10% in the 2012 election, only half of those voted. That's how accurate Eric is. Eric states have their new voter registrations increase at 4.2 times the rate of non-Eric states. That tells you what their focus is. That's how our voter rolls get huge. Ballot tracking and curing. So ballot tracks is given the voter and ballot info from SCORE by the Secretary of State, regardless of whether citizens opt in. So if you opt in to ballot tracks, that just opts you into getting the text messages. They have your data and everybody else's data no matter what. There is no and has been no independent or Colorado security auditing for ballot tracks. Not their systems, not their software, not their security, no aspect of it whatsoever. And also they state that their product doesn't require federal or state certification. So if the beginning of the election process is having accurate voter rolls and keeping that information, which should be public, available, and the information which should be private, then how is it that we're giving all of this information to this company that doesn't even allow us to look at their security? Not that we have the capability in the state, as far as I can tell, to do that, but there are organizations and companies and teams that can do that. We just don't happen to use any of them. And then Text to Cure is a ballot curing service that was piloted in Colorado, I want to say in Denver, and then now it's been adopted statewide by the Secretary of State, Secretary of State Griswold. They state they have a patented and proprietary security process. So whenever you see proprietary, that means you're not allowed to look at it. And that for me is, always a danger sign, because I like to look, and every time I look, I find problems. That's sort of my job in the military for a long time. So we have no insight whatsoever into the security of that system. This is their procedure. You probably can't read it there, but you basically text the word Colorado to an address to vote, and then they send you a link, and you enter your voter ID. And except for the last digit, that voter ID that I've got there on the slide is Secretary of State Griswold's voter ID. That's how hard it is to get that. They're all online. Everyone in here, if you're a Colorado voter, your voter ID is online. And I'll talk more about voting as Secretary Griswold later. Then you affirm your ballot return, and then you sign the affidavit on your phone screen, and then you take a photo of acceptable ID and submit it. And that's how you cure your ballot. So if you submitted a ballot and it didn't have your signature on it, or your voting intention was unclear, this is an acceptable way in the state of Colorado for you to cure it. Voting systems, we have two primarily. We have Dominion Voting Systems, Democracy Suite 5.11 CO. The Democracy Suite is used in 20 US states and 62 Colorado counties. They call it commercial off the shelf. But to be clear, no Dell system is commercial off the shelf. Every one of them is built to a customer's order. For me, as an adversarial thinker, what that means is they know who's going to get that machine. Every one of the Dell laptops for the last maybe 5 years, I think they've started to shift in 2019, but certainly all the ones that we have in the state were all built in China. That's the only place Dell built the laptops. A large proportion of their desktops and tower systems and servers were also built in China. So if Chinese factory workers and managers know who these systems are coming to, then they have an opportunity to put whatever they want in them. I'm not saying Chinese people are bad, but I don't trust the Chinese government. There was a guy in Hong Kong who pretty much expressed my perfect sentiment about the Chinese government. It was about not trusting them. So anyway, the Dominion system has an election management system as a software suite that tallies the cast vote records from the ImageCast Central scanners. It provides reports, and it supports election event design to create the ballot designs that then go to printers, among other administrative and reporting functions for the whole Democracy Suite. And then you have ImageCast Central. We don't use precinct scanners in Colorado. We use these centralized scanners in the counties. So for Dominion, it's a centralized optical scanner that also tabulates. So one machine takes the image and then decides what the image meant, and then saves both its tailored image and the digital record of that as the record of your vote. So when you get ballot images from county clerks, you're getting a ballot image that was produced by a system that we don't trust, or potentially don't trust. It's like taking the voting system's word for it. That's not my way. It also has an adjudication system, server and client, and they can tailor this to run on different machines. Sometimes you have a big enough county that you want it all running off one machine. Colorado, by the way, approved an engineering change order for the Dominion voting system that installed remote adjudication capability. Remote to where, I don't know. Supposedly the systems aren't connected to the internet, so I don't know what you need remote for. But that's what's on the approved order. And the adjudication system, adjudication is both a procedure and a function and a software application. So adjudication is where they look at a ballot and decide what it really meant. Maybe you overmarked and marked 2 candidates when you could only pick one. Maybe you didn't have any in that race, or maybe there were marks all over because handwriting is like mine. And then ImageCast X is a they don't call it ImageCast X on the state's list of certified systems, but it's ImageCast X. It's just being used as a ballot marking device. So if you need assistive technologies and you go into a voter service and polling center, the VSPCs, this is what they have there. It's either a 21-inch, it's either a 15-inch Samsung tablet or a 21-inch A-value tablet with a touch screen, and then it has assistive devices like the sip and puff or the paddles if you have poor eyesight or some other sort of requirement for assistive technology. And then you have ImageCast voter activation, which are typically Dell laptops that are used to program the smart cards that a voter can then go and use to vote in person at the ballot marking devices. And then we have Clear Ballot. Now, Clear Ballot is used in it's used in 2 counties, but it's about 7% of Colorado's population. It's used in Garfield and Douglas, and it's a little bit less complicated than Dominion Democracy Suite, but you have Clear Access, which is the ballot marking device, again, on Dell COTS, and printers, and then you have Clear Count, which is browser-based scanner and tabulation, and again, Dell COTS, and the scanners, so they use, I think, they have several approved scanners for each one of the voting systems. And then Clear Design is the election designer. And then you also, for UOCAVA, or Uniformed and Overseas Citizen Absentee Voting, you have mail-in ballots, and they mail the ballots to the voters, or they email the ballots to the voters, and then the voters can mark them and either mail them back or return them via email or return them from fax. So that's kind of the voting systems. Then we have the audit system. This one's my favorite. The Colorado RLA tool that is, a key part of the gold standard is based on Democracy Works-led software development. So the way it works is they seed it with rolls, 10 rolls of 10 10-sided die, and then those are the seed that gets inserted into the software. So we make a big show of videotaping, rolling the dice, and getting those random numbers, and then they take them and stick them into this software that you cannot see the operation of at all. And then out comes random numbers, apparently, according to the assertion. So the software randomly selects an efficient number of ballots to audit. I don't know why we got real concerned about it. Of all the places to be concerned about efficiency in government, voting wasn't the place where I think we needed it. It's coded by, and I don't know if you guys can see those names. Can you guys read those names on the screen there? This is who coded the software that determines, according to the state, whether or not our elections are secure. So some of the names in there for coders, these are all off GitHub where they have the repository. So Yeti, does anybody know Yeti? Or Tank 157, anyone? T for the cat, does anyone know T for the cat? This is who coded the software that our state says is the gold standard. And then I have a snippet here from the developer discussion where they talk about how a line of code that they're putting in obscures or prevents the client from viewing a particular CVR, or the cast vote record. That's the digital record of the vote. That's also not something I want my risk limiting audit software doing. The truth of the matter is you can randomize from any number set with about 100 online tools. You don't need thousands of lines of code that nobody's ever looked at and nobody's monitoring. All you need is a random number selector. You put in the range and you put in the percent you want, and it'll give you back numbers. You can correlate those to the rows on a spreadsheet of your ballots. That could be done in a county without any help at all from the state, and it should be. That's how you would do random selection. I don't even know what this software is doing. Nobody does. So the narrative continues. These are things that we've heard. Colorado is a gold standard of safe and secure voting. That's from Governor Polis. Our election model is the nation's gold standard. That's Secretary of State Griswold. Arguably the best system in the country. From El Paso County Clerk and Recorder, Mr. Broerman. I don't know how many systems he's checked. I've checked a few now. I would say no. Our votes are not being manipulated. That's from Congressman Buck. I don't know how Congressman Buck would know. I've looked, and I don't know. Representative Field says there's no evidence that there's any fraud. Former Secretary of State Williams says Dominion has been tested in 62 counties at least 807 times. He's talking about RLA. That same software I just told you was coded by a guy named T for the cat. That's tested. And then everybody's saying no systems are connected to the internet. Not a single person who said that would have any idea if they're connected to the internet. They just wouldn't know, and I'll show you what I mean by that. And then, of course, the other two panelists, speakers addressed, nothing's been proven in court. Well, I'd like a day. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we know about the vulnerabilities in our systems. And can you see that meme okay? So when your election systems aren't secure, you just have the illusion of control. That's us in that front car, and someone is behind the cart. And I'm pretty sure our public officials are in the cart just riding along. Okay, process vulnerabilities. So you've already heard voter registration safeguards are weak. They're like the meme, the image there. It's like a gate that you can just walk around. There's no fence even attached to it. There's no in-person verification for a massive percentage of our registered voters. The ID requirements are ridiculously lax, and I'll show you more about that later. Tens of thousands of ballots that get sent out are undeliverable. How accurate can the voter registration system be? And you can ask the county clerks, how many did they have undeliverable? I think in El Paso County, it was 8,000 or 9,000 that were undeliverable. Those aren't good odds. So, and also ERIC makes registration worse. In 2012, they contacted 723,000. I had that number wrong. ERIC contacted through postcards 723,000 eligible individuals in Colorado, but only 10% of the people they contacted registered, and less than half of those people voted. Those aren't good odds either. And also the initial and recurring cybersecurity evaluation for our systems is completely inadequate. There's no supply chain security whatsoever. There's no apparent concept of threat level and what you have to do to counter it. And every time I look at anything that's talking about security from the Secretary of State's office, it's talking about focusing on foreign disinformation. So, also, I keep hearing about how secure ballot drop boxes are. So let me tell you how I see this from my perspective of someone who's done penetration assessment and someone who has, professionally defeated systems. So this is a secure drop box in the lower left of the screen it's at a Boot Barn parking lot, which I like Boot Barn. And the circle up in the upper right of that first image is the security camera, which you might notice is blocked this is basically, you're looking at it from the west. So to the east, it's blocked by the pole. I can do anything I want from the east side of that pole, and I would go sock that camera. There's no alarm system on the camera, and nobody's reviewing the video. They just have it recorded so they can go back and look at it. So if I sock it, it's not like anybody will even know that there was video that was blanked out in that time period. And then the back of the system that I have circled there, the back of the box is where the locks are. And then that little square insert that you can't see is a device that costs about $10 on eBay, and the video online showing you how to use it shows you how to open that lock in 4 seconds. So I would estimate I would need less than a minute to back up with my truck to that lamppost, sock the camera, walk around, open the door, insert or take out anything I want, close it, remove the sock, and drive away. That's how secure the secure ballot boxes are. And then on the right-hand side, what you're looking at so that was a drop box. This is the ballot box that our teams of bipartisan judges use to transport the ballots from the drop boxes over to the counting centers in the counties. And so you have a yellow security tag. It's called a tamper evident tag, and then you have a master lock. The security evident tag, actually, the tamper evident tag actually takes 30 seconds to defeat, and the video of that is online. You just do it with aluminum from a soda can. You just make a little cylindrical shim. And then the master lock takes 4 seconds to defeat. And I actually have those shims at home to do that with the master lock.